Hey friends, welcome to a highly requested tutorial all about painting these beautiful white flowers that have been growing in my front yard. Hello, my name is Shayda Campbell and I've been painting these hydrangeas all month, sharing on Instagram, getting lots of requests for a tutorial, so here it is. And just a reminder that patrons can grab the sketch to help you with your painting. This painting begins and ends with graphite, so this could potentially be very helpful. Get all the bonus content that goes with the last 6 years of YouTube videos over at patreon.com/Shayda Campbell. Here is what my desk looks like as we begin the painting process. This is how I get started for all my paintings lately. I've got the flowers, a beautiful hydrangea from my front yard that blooms in September, a ceramic plate. That's my preferred palette when it comes to gouache, just a thrifted plate. And then you can see all the gouache colors here that I will use, and I'm going to throw a color list up there as well. The gouache comes out of the tube the consistency of toothpaste. You still mix in a lot of water, just like with watercolors, except it will be a lot more opaque. And I have a gouache course coming out this fall, so make sure you're following along, subscribe, follow me on Instagram for more info about that. And then my brushes, couple Filberts, and a small round brush. I have 2 glasses of clean water, paper towel for blotting my brush, and then I'm going to use pencil as well to begin and end this project. Now, my favorite pencil for pieces like this is a really soft graphite. So you're looking for numbers like 8B or 6B, and you definitely want to have your pencil sharpener or knife there to keep them really, really sharp. Nice dark, soft lead is perfect for mixing with gouache, but it will go dull very quickly. All right, let's begin with the sketch. I push the flowers back so I can see them very well during this process. So beginning working in pencil, I like to start with the vase just so that I make sure it doesn't get too big. I tend to draw vases a little too large, so I like to start with that and make sure it's small and that it's not taking up like the whole size of the whole sheet of paper. And this is a 7x10 hot pressed paper, by the way. All supplies are linked in the video description. Once I get that vase general shape, I start placing leaves, and I'm not going to capture every single leaf, but I want to get some of the main ones that I see. And then I'll start putting in the main floral stems, like where are they sitting? Where are these flowers going to actually sit? I'm sort of painting 3 of them. I'll get rid of some of my pencil lines sometimes as I go if I feel like things are getting a little too heavy. And I'll try to draw in some of the little floral shapes to help give the very delicate look of this flower, because this flower is made up of all these teeny tiny little blossoms and then these really delicate teeny tiny little like fluffy bits. Very fluffy, weird flower, but it's so pretty. And I think that very delicate, light as air look is what makes it really, really fun to paint. So that's what we're trying to capture. As I begin drawing this flower, you'll see I've got the stem in place, then I'm drawing all these tiny little blossoms sort of shooting off the stem, some larger blossoms right over top of that stem, and then I'll put in maybe some little fluffy bits and dots and scribbles to show that kind of fluffy stuff. And I think that's looking pretty good. I'm going to make this leaf in front a little larger and then make the water line. So the water line will have a slight curve to it, the same curve that the bottom of the vase has. And then I'm drawing 3 stems dropping down sort of in between those leaves. And then the 3 stems continue below that water line, but they're not connected. The illusion of the water is that the stems are sort of broken and disconnected. The reflection of the top of the water sort of cuts them in half. So that's an easy trick to make your water look very realistic. I put a bit of a shadow to the left there. A lot of my light is coming down from above since I am filming, so I have studio lights on, but there is a bit of a shadow. And then I'm going to sort of refine my leaf shapes a little bit. I don't need to have everything perfectly sketched to start the painting. I definitely want to say that. You can see that the sketch is very loose and free. I've put a few smaller leaves up there. I'm gonna pull my flowers back now so that basically just so that it's a pretty shot for YouTube for the video. That's not gonna work. Okay, flowers back in shot, looking pretty. Desk looks nice. Sketch looks good. It's very loose, very free. A lot of that will get covered up because of the opaque nature of the gouache. Some of it will show through though, because I do mix a lot of water into the gouache, sometimes using it like watercolor where it's more transparent. And then let's start mixing our color. Now for a really dark, nice, deep, natural green, I love sap green mixed with a brown like burnt umber or Van Dyke brown and a little bit of indigo. Of course, we've mixed lots of water in as well, so you can see the gouache has a little bit of a transparency. And then I'm just making these messy brush strokes with the number 6 Filbert. So the Filbert really allows me to be a bit more messy. I tend to do too much, try to make things too detailed, and I don't like the results. I like a painting that's just slightly more abstracted, a little bit more playful, we'll say. And so the Filbert helps me to kind of, not get quite as detailed. So you can see me making these big messy leaf shapes. We're gonna add some pressure, maybe go back in with a slightly darker green at the tops of the leaves where the flowers are overhanging. We can put some more water in, and some of the leaves that are kind of hanging out of the vase or look sort like they're in the background a bit, we can make a little bit more transparent and even a little bit more formless, like just throw a blob of paint on the page and then leave it alone. Call it a leaf. Remember the old Shayda Campbell line, it's a leaf if you say it's a leaf. So leave it alone, don't overwork it. We'll kind of just wiggle the brush, add a little pressure. Sometimes you will want to paint right around those flowers, kind of making the white flowers stand out against the white paper. So you can see me doing that there. What else? Let's put a lighter leaf right in the foreground here. So using some darker color and then adding water for lighter leaves, it will just help this whole piece sing and look a little more lively because there is difference between the leaves. It's not just this big blob of green right across the center of the painting. So some dark leaves, some lighter leaves that are a bit more transparent, so just add water. And so far so good. Let's move the palette over my plate so that you can see the mixing really well. I'm gonna take water on my Filbert and pick up some white. So just white, mixing lots of water in. Then we'll take that indigo. Now we've got a light blue. And now we take the brown, whether you're working with like a burnt umber or raw umber, I think I am using, or a Van Dyke brown. I tend to like those cool browns. This is one of my favorite simple ways to make a gray. It's just brown and blue with lots of white, lots of water. And this is what we're going to use for the vase and the water. So while it's fairly dark and concentrated, I'm going to use the Filbert, which has that nice flat, thick area, and make a nice thick line right across the bottom of the vase. Doesn't have to be perfect. And then I might add to it a little, leaving a few white spots, leaving a bit of negative space because glass will always have highlights on it. We're going to do a little thin line along the right-hand side, and then I tend to just pick up some water and I always will blur the gray that I'm putting down. So here I'm basically using a dirty brush with lots of water, and we're using that really, really light gray to add this look of water in the glass vase. And the thing here is you also want to have a paper towel handy or a cotton ball, whatever you like to use for lifting, so that you can lift up some of the color that you're laying down. Lifting is a watercolor and gouache technique that is used to help create highlights. And when you are painting glass or you're painting clouds or water, it is just one of the best, easiest ways to create natural looking highlights. And for glass, I just find it so helpful, but I'll use it on leaves as well, on flowers. It's a great way to start creating natural coloration. And so you can see me adding a bit of gray, then picking it up a little bit, then adding a few more little gray lines. So what I'm doing here is really just playing around, looking at the vase and just trying to achieve something that looks natural, but still I'm abstracting slightly. I'm not going for major realism here. So you can see me putting down some lowlights and some dark gray, and then I'll either put water on the brush and bleed it out a little, muss it up, and then I may still come in with a little bit of paper towel and lift a bit. So yeah, it's a process, and you'll play around and do the same. And once you're starting to be happy with the color, you're going to take that dark gray and do a rounded line, sort of in the opposite direction of that bottom of the vase line. So you're making it look as though the vase is three-dimensional, and that's just with a line of messy light gray, and you can still do some lifting, still blend it out a little. Then I'm taking like basically just water with a touch of gray paint in it, and we're putting that above the water line, still lifting slightly, bringing some more dark paint in to show where the top of the water is. And at this point, you could be done with the vase and the water, or you can keep going, and that's what you're going to see me do. And I'm going to speed the video up just slightly starting now, so we're no longer in sort of a very close to real time. This is at almost double speed. You're just going to watch me sort of play around. I keep reinforcing that line where the water ends, the top of the water. I'll play around with adding maybe just a hint of a water curving line at the back of the vase, but that's sort of hard to see. I keep adding a bit of darker color and then lifting it up. The one thing is I don't want the vase and the water to get too dark, but I do want them to stand out on the white paper. So I need there to be some shadow and shading, but if it gets too dark, it looks weird. Like water and glass are not dark gray. They have a bit of that tinge to them. So yes, keep playing around, watch what I do, try it for yourself, make sure to have that paper towel handy. I sort of keep using the same paper towel over and over. It tends not to get that dirty. I just sort of ball it up and keep lifting and adding more water until I'm really happy with the entire thing. Once I'm happy with it, my final step is always darkening the baseline, the bottom of that vase slightly, and then I'm going to leave it alone. We're going to stop playing around. I'll bring the palette over so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to mix up the color for the flowers. So I've taken lots of white with a hint of that cadmium yellow, hint of sap green, and I kind of keep mixing so I have some different colors, but I want it really, really light. So like the tiniest titch of yellow and a little hint of green. And we will start by painting some flowers here. And I use the Filbert because it makes a nice rounded petal. Kind of do like a 4-petal blossom. Then I decided the flowers are a little too lime. I added just a hint of magenta. It sounds funny, but like the tiniest little wisp of magenta in with that whitish green. It gives it a much softer color and more true to the flower, which is this really creamy color and not quite so bright lime green. And here we go again, just adding these messy hits of the Filbert brush, and they make these really lovely floral shapes. As I begin this portion of the painting, you can see me just using that really light color to hit that Filbert against the page, creating petals, basically floral shapes and petals, and some of them turn into flowers where I've got a cluster of 4, and some don't. Some are just sort of these messy ovals and circles, and I think it all works together to create this flower, this hydrangea. And then, sorry, my head's a little in frame, we're going to come in with a slightly darker green. So this is sap green with lots of water, lots of white, and just a hint of magenta to tone it down and make sure it's not too lime. And we are going to do these like dots and clusters of dots, and that tends to be in between the floral shapes and at the tips of these flowers. You can also use this sort of gray-green for some of the stems, but yeah, just doing the fuzzy bits. And you may want to switch to the round brush for this portion. I know I did after a while. I came in with the round. Now this time, once I had done some of that green, I added a bit more white to it, and then came in and started doing dotting on top of that, but not covering it entirely. So therefore giving a little more depth to the fuzzy bits. The fuzzy bits start with the gray-green, then come in with a lighter green and your smaller brush and just dot, and then create some more petal shapes. so much of my painting process is play. You can see me playing around and experimenting as I do the lifting to create glass and water. Now you can see me playing around and experimenting as I create floral shapes and fuzzy bits. So just try, keep looking at the flowers. If you're painting from life, which I encourage you to do, keep glancing at those flowers and deciding over and over again what you're trying to capture. Okay, here's an important part. We want to use a really, really white, light color now to bring some of those petal shapes down over top of our green leaves. Our green leaves should be nice and dry, so we're just going to do a few hits with that white, light color on top of the dark green. Okay, flowers are mostly done. This next section I will call shadows and stems. So I'm creating a very dark green. This is a lot of brown, a lot of that indigo with a bit of the sap green. So you've got this super dark color. And we're gonna come in and just fill in some of the area between the leaves. We want the bright green leaves to really stand out, so we have to create some sort of depth and darkness, and you can go right around the thin stems and you can see how that makes our stems and leaves really pop, and it's going to help with the flowers, the nice white flowers as well. Now the thing is that dark area has to end somewhere, so you can see me adding one more light green leaf in there to kind of end the darkness. And I'm just going over some of these leaves, making sure that they are the color I want them to be. I might darken this guy up a little. He looks a little light to be right in front of that really dark shadowy area. I'm also going to darken up some of the stems, but I don't want to go too far because the stems on these hydrangeas are quite light. And then I put just a little bit of green in and around some of those flowers because the hydrangea does have smaller leaves higher up on the stem, and those green bits, even if it's just a blob of green, will help the white flowers really stand out. With that done, I want to work on the stems in the vase. So I'm adding a little bit more brown to the palette here, and then I'm mixing in some indigo. So I'm getting this really dark, cool brown, and that's the color I want to use for the stems. So I'll start with the 3 lines above the water. So they go to that dark water line, and just the way my flowers were sitting, they all kind of meet at one point. So I'm making the stems a little bit thick, little bit gnarly, like they shouldn't be too smooth. You want them a bit bent and crooked. And then we jump down below that water line and we continue them. So make sure there's a break and make sure they don't look like they connect. That's a great simple trick to show that this is water, and the water is giving that illusion that the stems aren't quite connected, because that's what water tends to do. It sits and it's got that kind of thick line where it ends. I'm also going to add just a hint of brown along the water line because the water tends to reflect whatever is in it, but I'll probably muss that up a bit or lift a little so that it's not too sharp. We just want to keep everything loose and messy. And then I said this section is stems and shadows, so we've done the dark shadowy bits between the leaves. Now we're going to take some of that watery gray on the filbert, and we're just going to sort of do some lines to the left and across the bottom of the vase. And that's our shadow. We don't need to add a whole lot more, maybe some watery dots over here. I tend to have a problem making shadows too big, so just go small at first. Do your lifting to create that sense of things being like loose and ephemeral, the way flowers are, the way shadows are, the way water and glass are. All of this is sort of hard to capture, but we're going to do it by playing around and having fun. So there's my messy shadow, a little bit of wet into wet, a little bit of lifting. And friends, if wet into wet, if lifting, if all of this is like, I do have a watercolor for beginners. Remember, gouache is a watercolor medium, so it's mostly all the same techniques. If you think a beginner level course would be helpful, head to my website, shaydacampbell.com. to check it out. I've got a great amount of course and workshop offerings over there. And then I do have a gouache little crash course for the absolute beginner coming out this fall. Okay, I just darkened up a few leaves. Now we're in the section that I would call finishing touches. So maybe we go in and go add a little white to some of those blossoms. But for the most part, I think this looks good, and we're gonna leave it alone and let it dry. Now, a painting like this begins and ends with pencil, with graphite. So now that it is dry, give it a good long time. You do not want any wet areas. Give it half an hour. We are going to come in with that 8. I'm using the 8B pencil from Faber-Castell. All of the supplies are linked in the video description. And the first thing I like to do is just go over the lines of the vase and the line of that water, since those are sort of concrete parts that I want to reinforce and really make pop. Maybe I'll put some sketchy scribbles in the shadow, and then I definitely need to add some detail to these white flowers. And I tend to go around the petal shapes, but very loose, sometimes going once or twice or 3 times over one petal to make it look very, almost like there's a little bit of movement. It's very ephemeral and very loose. And I'll do a few little dots or maybe a semicircle at the center of each flower. I do some sort of dotting and scribbling on those fuzzy bits. And I just play around. And if I feel like the pencil's getting too heavy, I erase it, and sometimes I like things that are half erased, so they're sort of barely there. So again, the act of play and experimentation is going to be so important to this part of the process. And I can't tell you exactly how yours is going to come out, but I encourage you to have fun with it and loosen up and play. And I think that will be your best method. Okay, we've gone over some of the petals. You'll notice a lot of my sketchy bits are offset, so it might not be centered right around the painted flower. The pencil bit might go off a little bit. Some of the sketchy bits on the vase and the shadows are offset from the vase, from the painted vase and shadows. So just be very free, have fun. I think I've said that enough. And I think you'll know when it's done. You still want to keep things light and lovely and loose. I think that's looking good. I'm gonna have a sip of my tea. Think about it, look at it, step back for a moment. I think the pencil's done. Now I'm going to go back one last time. It's sort of back and forth, pencil, paint, pencil, paint. I just want to lighten up some of these white flowers. So just adding another hit of that Filbert. The Filbert gives such a beautiful round petal shape, and we can just add a little hint there of white, of real true white on some of these flowers. And then we might want maybe one more flower that drops down over the leaves just to make everything look like it's very 3-dimensional. And yeah, just step back from the painting. Do a few random white blobs, and I think you'll be quite successful. To complete the painting, I'm going to take a true white on the tip of that round brush, and we are just going to add some thin, delicate highlights along the waterline, maybe in the corner of the vase. There are some highlight spots across the base of my vase as well. So the glass will always have those little reflections. You can put them in a few key spots, and it really just makes everything pop. The whole thing just looks a little bit more realistic. And then from here, you can play around. You could be totally done, or you could be not done, I never know when to finish a painting. I never know when to walk away. You might want to add a few more just little white petals, lighten up some areas a bit more. You might want to add a little bit more dark green on some behind and in around some of the white flowers. So I'm just doing some very, very small little tweaks here, and I don't want to spend too much time on that because everyone's painting will be a little different, and I don't think this adds a ton. Maybe just a bit of dark green around some of those flowers and a bit of white on top of the dark green, basically, is what I'm saying. And taking a really long time to say. Okay, let's put the brush down, Shayda. Just step away from the painting. Let's sign it and date it. And thank you so much for following along today. I've had a lot of requests for these hydrangeas that I've been painting. They've been blooming in my front yard, so I've been painting them a lot, sharing on Instagram, lots of requests. So hopefully you enjoyed this tutorial. Want to purchase this painting? I have a highlight on Instagram where all my paintings for sale are saved. They're all around $200 USD. DM me on Instagram or email teamshayda@gmail.com. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you soon with a new tutorial.